Then you hear him on a podcast actually talking about Japanese internment camps, how they were rounded up and arrested. Can we play that bite right here really quickly and just show you that he's actually comparing Japanese internment camps to January the 6th, and now he's calling his Democratic opponents enemies from within, which would, in his logic, would allow him to do the same thing, I think.
Why are they still being held? Nobody's ever been treated like this. Nobody's ever, maybe the Japanese during Second World War, frankly, but, you know, they were held too.
Why are they still being held? They beat up cops.
They committed crimes.
They committed crimes. They trashed the Capitol. They went into the Capitol. They tried to stop the constitutional counting of the vote, which is done every January 6th. They tried to get in the way at his insistence on the peaceful transfer of power. It's pretty obvious why. But anyway, so all of these lines are being drawn. And again, every day he talks about Nancy Pelosi, Adam Schiff being enemies from within. And every day that a Fox News host pushes back and says, you don't mean that, do you? And he says, yes, I mean that. He's done it now 3-4 times where he's pushed back.
Look, the comments are completely chilling and real. Fox News and other networks avoiding it and saying it's not what he means or not wanting to know what it means. Their lack of curiosity is bordering on malpractice and definitely not delivering truth or answers for their viewers.
Well, saying you don't know what he means is just not true. Let's bring in right now MSNBC chief legal correspondent and the host of MSNBC's The Beat, Ari Melber.
Yeah, and Ari, what's the legal possibilities given what Donald Trump has said and done and is expressing to do, if you know, to believe him?
Well, I think you're both hitting it on the head. The best predictor of behavior is behavior. And so this is what he tried to do in the first term. It's what he's admitting openly. And no number of Mike Johnson lies or Fox, we misheard you, you couldn't have meant that, aw shucks, will change the fact that he is saying this. I think Joe is exactly right to point to the negative precedents in American history and the dehumanizing legal loophole language. They also do this with foreign immigrants. Now, there are some people who are undocumented who have broken a law to be here, but we still currently have a legal process for that. If you go down the internment or the enemy combatant road, which he is publicly talking about because he's talked about a lot of different ways that he would abuse power, demanding executions, demanding attacks on the border of immigrants. As soon as you go down that road, as Joe emphasized, you are asking for that lane or legal loophole. And if you can do it to an enemy combatant or someone that you declare as an immigrant, first, that's wrong, and our system could show you examples of why that shouldn't happen. But second,
right.
If you're reelected and you say, I announced in public, this is what I get to do, it wasn't a secret. Once you open up that lane, Joe, then who's to say that you grab some other full American citizen and you put them in your, what they're calling an immigrant internment program? Where's your due process to even get out from under that? We had Stephen Miller, Trump White House aide on The Beat, and I asked him about what former Secretary Esper said about the controversial, likely illegal, and shocking demands that Miller was making, which were not carried out in the first term, to directly use the military on U.S. soil, which is banned by Posse Comitatus and other things. And I asked him about it, and Miller said on this air, within the last month, I don't see what's controversial about that. So you bet this is a big issue people need to understand, because they will date back to this campaign season, the enemy within and the other claims to say, everybody knew this if they get an electoral college victory. This was out there.
Well, yeah. You know, it's already what lawyers talk about, laying the precedent. He could very easily say, I said repeatedly that I was going to arrest Democrats. I said repeatedly that Democrats were the enemy from within. I said it repeatedly. And, you know, by the way, the Wall Street Journal editorial page yesterday wrote just a shocking op-ed where they talk about Trump derangement syndrome, basically, which is actually defined now, I guess, by quoting Donald Trump's own words. But they went after people like Anne Applebaum, who grew up fighting, pushing back against communism, who has spent her entire life documenting
autocracy,
the dangers of the Soviet Union, the war crimes of the Soviet Union, the crimes against humanity, and this is being painted as some left-wing person. I want you to clear up one more thing here. I think it's very important. It's critical. There are people that I respect who will say, well, you know, Trump's already been in office for years, and nothing bad happened. They ignore January 6th, which the Wall Street Journal editorial page did too. And then they'll go, he never arrested Hillary Clinton. Well, I would like you to explain how he went to Jeff Sessions, his first attorney general, and said, I want you to arrest Hillary Clinton. Sessions came back and said, I've got nothing. We've got nothing we can arrest her on. And then he did the same thing to Barr. He tried in 17 and 18 to arrest Hillary Clinton. And then 2 weeks before the election, he started publicly pressuring Barr and privately pressuring Barr, his attorney general, to arrest Joe Biden and his family 2 weeks before an election.
Correct. I mean, the evidence is overwhelming, and I've also heard that, Joe. I think, I don't know if we're talking to the same people or people who are just talking to each other on some, I don't know, tax cut group chat. But the evidence is there. And so we've heard people minimize or run away from it, and some people might be less informed. But the fact that they failed at certain things, they failed at the coup. Many people are convicted in prison on sedition and other charges who had due process, shredding the lies that Trump said on that podcast as if they were rounded up. No, they weren't. They had all their due process. The court appeals. Some of those cases, separately from his own, went to the Supreme Court. But they're convicted on sedition charges because they tried and failed to have a coup. Donald Trump tried and failed to get a foreign investigation of the Bidens. We had a whole impeachment over that. Now, had he succeeded, had that come out in a different order, and there had been a big, serious-sounding foreign investigation of Hunter Biden and Joe Biden before the Democratic primaries, if it was timed right, that might have been the thing that shifted it the other way. And what was Donald Trump worried about? The thing that happened. He correctly identified one thing, which is that Joe Biden was the bigger challenge to him in 2020. He lost that election. He tried to get McCabe investigated and indicted. They made 2 rounds at that, the deputy FBI director who replaced Comey. He failed. He got a tax audit into James Comey. He requested the Hillary Clinton investigation you mentioned. He had a trumped-up investigation of John Kerry, who many people may not thought about recently as a Democratic foe, but of course he was a Democratic nominee and Secretary of State. Those are just some. If we had more time, we could make a longer list. The fact that he failed. And by the way,
what about Durham? What about Durham as well? I mean, Durham made an absolute fool of himself going on what Donald Trump would call a witch hunt.
Absolutely. And talk about journalists. He's publicly threatened to pull licenses. He's gone after Bezos and other very powerful people just because they're affiliated with one newspaper. I mean, Jeff Bezos owns a lot of different stuff, but it's the newspaper, the one independent authority of fact checking, that so upset Donald Trump. He went after CNN's merger for that reason. They happen to be a competitor here, but I'm talking about them as other credentialed journalists facing that kind of crackdown. That was last time. And the first Comey memo, this is often forgotten because there's such a pile of malfeasance. The first Comey memo detailed failed requests to investigate New York Times journalists, and Trump saying to Comey, with all the national security issues, if we could at least jail one, we could send a message. Well, Comey testified to Congress, and you remember, Joe and Mika, that was item 8 or 15, because there were other more serious ones. But that's in the early Comey memos, and whatever one thinks of James Comey now, he was a registered Republican who had a history in the Bush administration. He wrote that down because he was concerned about the illicit or possibly illegal targeting of the Times.
So, Ari, as a final note, the outsized role that Elon Musk is playing in this election, but in particular, this offer to pay people to register to vote. Can you talk to us about the legality of that?
Yeah, I'll be quick. Federal law already bans efforts to buy voter registration. Before you even get to whether he is also nudging towards Trump, which the topics in his so-called petition seem to do. So depending on how the courts view this, if they view it as an inducement to register, he says, oh, it's money for people who've already registered. But if people who haven't registered look at that as a bounty or reward and register for that reason, it could violate federal law. There haven't been precedents on this, so it is a larger question. And a final non-legal point. If it's October in a general election and the only way you can get people to agree with your ideas is to pay them, maybe your ideas aren't that popular.
Let me read the section about Hitler that you allude to, Congressman. Quote, former generals who have worked for Donald Trump say that the sole military virtue he prizes is obedience. As his presidency drew to a close and in the years since, he has become more and more interested in the advantages of dictatorship and the absolute control over the military that he believes it would deliver. Quote, I need the kind of generals that Hitler had, Trump said in a private conversation in the White House, according to two people who heard him say that. People who were totally loyal to him, that follow orders. When you hear Trump's campaign rhetoric, what orders do you think he has in mind?
Well, you know, it's worth remembering that military officers also take an oath to the Constitution. And I do believe that the vast majority of them understand that their oath is to the Constitution of the United States, not to be obedient to anyone. And by the way, if you want to go back to World War II metaphors, any military officers who are wavering might read up on the story of the Nuremberg trials, in which I was just following orders was the kind of defense that led to the gallows. But look, we know what motivates Trump. It's nothing. It's absolutely nothing but self-aggrandizement. So in any given moment, whatever Trump thinks is in that moment, advantageous thing, he will order flag officers to do. And again, flag officers would be well reminded, and I don't think they need this reminder, that their oath is to the Constitution of the United States and to take care that the laws be faithfully executed, not to any one individual.
Let me dig back into this reporting with you, Miles Taylor. This is a deeply reported story about the tragic murder of a member of the military and Donald Trump's offer to pay for the funeral. Let me pick up the reporting where they are reporting out the process of the funeral bill showing up at the White House. Quote, according to a person close to Trump at the time, the president was agitated by McCarthy, the Secretary of the Army, Ryan McCarthy's comments. He blamed leadership failures at Fort Hood. Trump was agitated by that. He raised questions about the severity of the punishments dispensed to senior officers and non-commissioned officers. In an Oval Office meeting on December 4th, 2020, officials gathered to discuss a separate national security issue. Toward the end of the discussion, Trump asked for an update on the McCarthy investigation. Christopher Miller, the acting Secretary of Defense, Trump had fired his predecessor, Mark Esper, 3 weeks earlier. Writing in a tweet, Mark Esper has been terminated, was in attendance, along with Miller's chief of staff, Kash Patel. At a certain point, according to two people present at the meeting, Trump asked, quote, did they bill us for the funeral? What did it cost? According to attendees and to contemporaneous notes of the meeting taken by a participant, an aide answered, yes, we received a bill. The funeral cost $60,000. Trump became angry. It doesn't cost $60,000 to bury a bleeping Mexican. He turned to his chief of staff, Mark Meadows, and issued an order, quote, don't pay it. Later that day, he was still agitated. Quote, can you believe it, he said, according to a witness, effing people trying to rip me off, end quote. Miles, we've talked a lot for 4 years now about where the generals are. It appears between the Woodward book and Jeffrey Goldberg's new piece of reporting, they're right in front of us. Somehow, some of these stories about his disdain for the military are reaching the public through journalism.
Well, and I would say, Nicole, there's some words you said a few times there that we should focus on. Contemporaneous notes. Now, I don't know who Jeffrey Goldberg's sources were, but the reason I don't doubt this reporting is I was one of those people taking contemporaneous notes in those meetings. And why? Because generals like Jim Mattis and John Kelly and Mark Milley went into those meetings. They told their aides like me, you need to document conversations with the president. Why? Not because they were looking to defy lawful orders, but because when you went into that Oval Office, you were worried you were going to get illegal orders or you were going to witness corruption. And it was happening so frequently that people were sitting in these meetings and writing word for word what the president was saying to make sure they got it right after the fact. That seems to be the case here. And the things that were said are not extraordinary. That's exactly what a meeting with Donald Trump sounds like, especially when it comes to members of the military. And I hate to say it, Nicole, but his disposition towards members of the military was that they were toy soldiers. And if they didn't comply with his orders, he didn't want them there. And that's why he fired or pushed aside so many defense and national security officials during his tenure, is that they weren't doing what he wanted to do when it came to nuclear conflicts or illegal orders to shoot people in the legs at the border, or to deem migrants as unlawful enemy combatants, as terrorists. Or again, Nicole, when I was there, he wanted to invoke the Insurrection Act to conduct activities that our lawyers thought would be illegal at the border. That's the type of thing that will test the oaths of our service members if Donald Trump wins a second term.
Miles, you worked for General John Kelly. He is quoted in Jeffrey Goldberg's new piece. Let me read from that section. Quote, in their book, The Divider, Donald Trump in the White House, Peter Baker and Susan Glasser report that Trump asked John Kelly, his chief of staff at the time, quote, why can't you be like the German generals? Trump at various points had grown frustrated with military officials he deemed disloyal and disobedient. Throughout the course of his presidency, Trump referred to flag officers as, quote, my generals. According to Baker and Glasser, Kelly explained to Trump that German generals tried to kill Hitler 3 times and almost pulled it off. This correction did not move Trump to reconsider his view. No, no, no. They were totally loyal to him, Trump responded. Quote, this week I asked John Kelly about their exchange. He told me that when Trump raised the subject of German generals, Kelly responded by asking, do you mean Bismarck's generals? He went on, I knew he didn't know who Bismarck was or about the Franco-Prussian War. I said, do you mean the Kaiser's generals? Surely you can't mean Hitler's generals. And he said, yeah, Hitler's generals. I explained to him that Rommel had to commit suicide after taking part in a plot against Hitler. Kelly told me Trump was not acquainted with Rommel. It is the collision of ignorance, the corruption of a soul to disdain men and women who give to something larger of themselves, the inability to grasp the concept, even if you haven't served in the military. Most people who haven't served revere those who have. Say more about General Kelly's education about who Donald Trump is.
Well, first I'll say he's the most honorable person that I've ever worked for. John Kelly has more integrity in his pinky finger than Donald Trump has in his whole body or has demonstrated in his entire career. And Kelly was very, very clear-eyed about who Donald Trump was. But he wasn't going to leave the administration after his first exposure to the man. He wanted to try to see if there was a way to keep that ship stable. Now, of course, we all know how that ended, as Trump in the end gets rid of anyone who tries to contain his worst impulses. But I think there was extraordinary alarm from the generals in what they saw in the president, and not just the immediacy of his impulsive behavior, but what that behavior looked like in the context of history. You don't have to listen to hyperbole about people saying Donald Trump looks like the dictators of the past. Look at his own language. Look at the language of his running mate. I mean, it's his running mate that called him America's Hitler. It's Donald Trump himself who has repeatedly lauded the worst dictator in the 20th century and compared his desires to that man. Take him at his word. That would be my exhortation to the American people as they go out to vote.
Claire McCaskill, I'll read more from this brand new piece of reporting in The Atlantic. Quote, this wasn't the only time Kelly felt compelled to instruct Trump on military history. In 2018, Trump asked Kelly to explain who the good guys were in World War I. Kelly responded by explaining a simple rule. Presidents should, as a matter of politics and policy, remember that the good guys in any given conflict are the countries allied with the United States. Despite Trump's lack of historical knowledge, he had been on record as saying that he knew more than his generals did about warfare. He told 60 Minutes in 2018 that he knew more about NATO than James Mattis, his Secretary of Defense at the time, a retired 4-star Marine general who had served as a NATO official. Trump also said on a separate occasion that it was he, not Mattis, who had captured the Islamic State. Your reaction, Claire, to this reporting?
Well, first, let me also say a word about John Kelly. I worked with John Kelly as the ranking member of the Homeland Security Committee when he was the Secretary of Homeland Security. I knew him before that as a member of the Armed Services Committee, as I knew Jim Mattis. These people don't lie, and they don't respect people who do. And I believe John Kelly went to work for Donald Trump because he thought he was doing a service for his country. He thought he would protect the country from Trump's worst instincts. He left when he realized he couldn't, especially when he grasped how much disdain Donald Trump had for the members of the military who served. And remember, John Kelly's son was killed in combat. So when John Kelly says this happened, I guarantee you it happened. Absolutely. And the other thing to remember about this is what they're doing in this Atlantic piece is with thorough reporting, they're pulling a thread from the very beginning when he shocked us all by looking down his nose at John McCain for being a prisoner of war, all the way through his presidency, when he would not embrace those who had been wounded in war, would not risk his hairdo for visiting those who had sacrificed, made the ultimate sacrifice for the world's freedom. So this is a consistency that Donald Trump has had. So they can, Kash Patel and those idiots can lie all they want to about what he said. The other important thing to remember about this story, Nicole, is when he promised the family he would take care of their funeral expenses, that was before the election. That was in April of 2020, when he said, I'm not going to pay to bury the effing Mexican. That was after he had lost in December. So people need to remember, he'll say anything before an election, but his real true character comes out after the election.
And
She continues to tout the growing support from Republicans, from the Cheneys, from other GOP lawmakers, from some of those Trump vets who spoke at the DNC, over 100 Republican national security officials who endorsed Harris. And those are important policy figures that, speaking together, might make a point. But many undecided voters may not know them by name. But there are also some well-known people who once called Trump a friend. Geraldo Rivera made these big headlines in endorsing Harris over Trump. His statement on the matter began, "Sore loser." He said, as president, he was a loyal friend, and my resulting coverage gave him the benefit of most doubts. But noting how after losing in 2020, Trump ran an increasingly menacing campaign to discredit the election with no meaningful proof, Geraldo, in the statement, went farther than we've seen some people do, given the environment we're in right now. And I want to read this so you clearly hear it before we bring him in tonight. He says to MAGA fans, if you are a Republican, Trump has made a liar of you. He unleashed a violent attack on the center of democracy. Trump is a sore loser who cannot be trusted to honor the Constitution, wrote Geraldo. That is why I'm voting for Kamala Harris. It was a newsworthy statement and made a lot of headlines. And I can tell you on a big newsy night, he is our leadoff guest, the legendary TV news journalist and host, Geraldo Rivera. He's won a Peabody and Emmy Awards.
Hi, Ari.
Hi, nice to have you. I've got up on the screen much of your work over many decades in many contexts. But your first time here, and I thank you for joining us tonight.
Seeing all those different hairdos.
Sure.
Thank you, Ari. I am delighted to be here. I am honored, really. Thanks for asking me.
Oh, well, thanks for being here. What you say also matters in how you say it and who you say it to. Tell us about what you were getting across there and why you went beyond the usual, hey, here's my tick box, to address people that you say Trump has made a liar out of.
Well, I've been against the president, the former president, since shortly after the election. It became clear to me that he was drinking some kind of Kool-Aid, that he was being very selfish. He was refusing to acknowledge the will of the American people. I thought that it was a passing thing, but it wasn't. Then January 6th happened, and right before my very eyes, there he was, after having incited all those people to put their lives on the line and risking so much from the point of view of the country and the officers who were there and so forth. He just unleashed this frenzy. And I thought that it was so anti-constitutional. It was so selfish. It was so counterfactual that I had to speak up. And on January 7th, I called for his impeachment. That was our estrangement. I thought that I could ride out this kind of cycle. I don't do a lot of politics. my various capacities. But to see him being competitive in every single race, if not leading, I began worrying a few weeks ago that this guy could actually defy all the odds and all the indictments and the convictions and the hundreds of millions of dollars in civil penalties and all the rest of it, and win and become president of the United States again. So I thought I had to speak out, and I'm glad I did. You can always worry about people coming after you as a result. People trying to hurt you for what you do, whatever it is. Whatever it is, it is. But all I knew is I had to speak out. I had to let people know that I was once his friend for many years.
Yeah.
But by ignoring the Constitution, turning his back on it, that was the end.
What you've learned through your life in TV and media, and why you came to that conclusion about Trump.
Well, Ari, it was very easy for me after he stabbed the Constitution in the back. I really think that the most important person in this country for that cycle of the election was the vice president, Mike Pence. He was so courageous to stand his ground against Trump's bizarre request that he take his symbolic role in the in certifying the electoral vote and stop the certifying of the election. He really tried to put himself above the Constitution. It was such a staggering, such a profound move. It was so damaging. It was so unprecedented. It was so extraordinary. It was very much like Maduro in Venezuela. He wanted the American people to ignore their casting of the ballot and the significant margins by which he had lost the election, and just out of sheer loyalty to him, ignore the 2.5 centuries of the United States existence. It was something that I could not abide. And yes, he has always been very nice to me and my family, and a good friend and a hangout buddy and all the rest of it. That only made it worse, Ari, because for me to take that step, for me to really to get off the couch and say, this cannot abide. This has to end right here. What is shocking to me, though, is, as I mentioned at the very top of the program, is that despite all of that, he could still be the 47th president.
He could win, and you're also talking about how people should view him, and you know him and you've worked with him. And he's gotten away with a lot by a heck of a lot of people saying, he's an entertainer, he doesn't mean it, don't judge him by the standards. You've heard the whole bit about taking him, not literally. So I want to play a contrast of two things. Briefly, you on Celebrity Apprentice, because, of course, Geraldo, I mean, it happened. But then dead serious, the talk about generals and coups and decimating people within this country as the, quote, enemy. First, Apprentice.
The pie crust was burnt.
That it was burnt, Geraldo.
I didn't get a single consumer
That's
complaint
terrible.
about the Vortex pie.
Okay, what did you think of Geraldo Gilbert as your project manager?
I thought he did a great job, unless you thought he did a bad job, in which case he was terrible.
Comedians telling jokes on a show, and I don't like my pie crust too burnt either. So that's the joke, right? But you're out here with your credibility. I don't think you stand to gain something in particular out of this. It would have been easier for you to go along with whatever the history was. And you're making a warning that people could hear tonight, and you're endorsing Harris, and you're being very clear. And I want to read from this Atlantic piece. Nicole Wallace mentioned this earlier in our coverage today. Trump, I need the kind of generals that Hitler had. Quote, that's according to two people who heard it in the White House. Quote, people who were totally loyal to him that follow orders. There are many ways to make a point that you might want an organized military. We all know what orders Hitler gave and were followed. Do you take this as a serious threat if he got a second term?
Oh, my goodness. Let me just very briefly back up to Celebrity Apprentice, because you presented it there, and very importantly. The timing is very important, because Celebrity Apprentice, his last season, ended just before he announced for president. So in my personal point of view, here I was, my hangout buddy was suddenly going to be in the Oval Office, the president of the United States, or running for president of the United States. That is a very, very heady mix. That is a very, intoxicating kind of situation. I would submit, a lot of why people go to work in Washington and in the White House and here and there is be close to power. And, I don't know consciously what my thought process was, except to think that it was pretty cool. In that mindset, particularly at Fox News, you begin to overlook the things that that are counter narrative to that. Anything that smacks of maybe that's not true. You dismiss charges. I remember he made fun of the handicapped New York Times reporter. He was horrible toward the sacred memory of Senator John McCain. It was just his service to the country and all the flag at half staff over the White House. Why the hell is that flag down? Famously or infamously, says Trump. So, even though he did a lot of things that when he announced he was running for president, and the Mexicans are pouring over the border and they're sending their rapists and their prisoners, and I assume there's some good people. You forgive so much. And I am so disappointed in my kind of blindness, because when push came to shove, he was revealed by his own action to be exactly the person that his critics were saying that he was.
You feel bad. You feel
some friendships and all the rest.
But you're sharing. You feel contrite to some degree about that versus now.
Contrition. I don't know if that's the right word. Embarrassed is another word.
You feel embarrassed?
I feel. You're putting me up against my loyalty to someone who is nice, and it was good to me, and a lot of. So it's very difficult to confront and say that I was embarrassed. But in retrospect, I wish I had bailed on the Trump train a lot sooner, before he threatened the Constitution of the United States with its utter destruction.
Voting begins in Wisconsin today. What's the Harris campaign's focus there?
Well, good to be with you, Jose. Wisconsin is voting now, so it is really underway. It's from turning expectations into real action, trying to get voters, especially in communities that are building the blue wall the Democrats need for the vice president if she is to win this election. Here in Madison, the state capital, it is known to be a stronghold for Democrats, and so part of the strategy is trying to reach out into the suburban areas and to try to trim some of the rural support that they know typically goes to former President Trump. So today at this venue, later this afternoon, we're here early. The former president, Barack Obama, will be here with Governor Walz. And part of that message is for Obama to tell the Harris-Walz story in a way that can be effective. And I've been on the trail with the former president, and he talks a lot about Donald Trump and what Barack Obama says is his unfitness to serve another term. So that is part of what we expect today. When it comes to trying to fortify among those voters in the suburban areas, one thing that the Harris-Walz campaign points out is among all the types of voter blocks, those voters who live in the suburbs who are perhaps a bit more mature, they've got mortgages to pay, they've got kids in school, they're concerned about a whole range of issues, that they are reliable voters. They don't sit home typically. And so they want to make sure they are trying to convert any of the voters who might have been interested in Nikki Haley, for example, as a Republican, those disaffected Republicans, as well as shoring up the Democratic base and turnout. And certainly Barack Obama has been talking to African-American men and men broadly, because, of course, we know there is a gender gap in this race that has been borne out by polling, showing that Donald Trump is more effective among men and Kamala Harris among women. Harris, of course, also strong among college-educated voters. This, of course, is a college town as well. Jose?
Thank you, Kelly. And in Basel, we have new NBC reporting that some Democrats are concerned about the Harris campaign's ability to win what's called the blue wall of swing states. The vice president needs to win an election. A senior campaign official telling NBC News, quote, there has been a thought that maybe Michigan or Wisconsin will fall off, and stressed that the bigger concern is over Michigan. Also, how critical are these states?
Well, they're very critical, but I would also acknowledge that because the vice president has raised tremendous amounts of money, over $1 billion or more, that she has multiple paths to victory that they probably did not have back in the summer. But that doesn't mean they're not going to contest everywhere. You know, when I talk to a lot of voters, when I talk to a lot of organizers, particularly over the last few days, they've got busloads and busloads of volunteers going into these states, Pennsylvania in particular, but also out into the Midwest. And a lot of those volunteers, part of the conversation isn't just about door knocking and telling people to get out to vote. It's also about giving them talking points to be able to really explain with some detail why it's important to vote for the Harris campaign. So in my experience, in my almost 30-year experience in this business, there is a lot more. There's a lot more granularity. There's a lot more detail. There's a lot more intentionality around not just where they're going to get out the vote, but what they're saying to voters when they get there. So I guess the overall message is there's no stone unturned, and they're contesting everywhere, and nothing is going to be sort of pushed off and slumped off and written off in this cycle.
You know, Basil, I've just been wondering about, and, you know, using your 30 years of experience, when is the point, or is there a point of super saturation, for example, on campaign ads? I was just speaking with someone this morning who was saying, I just can't stop getting ads, and I'm quite frankly tuning them out. Is there a super saturation period?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I have a lot of friends that sometimes will send me pictures of 30 to 40 mail pieces that they've gotten in a short period at the end of the cycle. And look, I think sometimes voters do get a little fatigued by so many commercials, so many text messages, because that's, you know, a certain change from when I started before it was mail, and it's still mail. People do still get a lot of that. So yeah, I mean, I do think there's fatigue, but ultimately what happens at the end of all of this is somebody going to your door and pulling you out and saying you got to vote, or you seeing somebody on the corner. Ultimately, that actually can make all the difference, because yeah, some people will throw out some of those mail pieces, but at least you know who that candidate is, and at least you know even a little bit about what that candidate stands for, and actually that's half the battle right there.
And Garrett, meanwhile, you're in Greensboro, where Trump is set to hold a rally tonight. He was campaigning there yesterday, too. Is the Trump campaign concerned about North Carolina?
Well, Jose, the Trump campaign never admits to being concerned about anything. In fact, it's part of their strategy to project strength everywhere and suggest that they will win in every state and sort of invite people along for the ride for that. But their actions undercut that narrative. Donald Trump was supposed to be giving a speech tonight to the NRA in Georgia, but last week canceled that speech to add this rally here in Greensboro, only about 80 or 100 miles from his event last night. Now, part of the reason to do that is to capture early vote, which is well underway here in North Carolina. I'm at an early vote location right now, and you can't quite see, so I won't even try to show you, but just farther down, maybe 100 yards behind me, is the beginnings of the line for this Trump rally tonight. And so the opportunity exists for them to try to lock in some votes in a county that has been a bluer lean of late, but where this morning I found one perhaps a little bit shy. I read him as a Trump voter talking about the issues that will decide the election for him. Listen.
What issues are most important?
The economy and the problem with illegal immigration and the high crime.
Do you have confidence that this election will be fairly decided?
I sure hope so. I have some confidence, not 100%. I guess we'll see.
Jose, that last bit I think is so important, that we'll see. I have heard some confidence, some skepticism from voters of both parties that I've talked to in this state since we got here yesterday. You know, the way in which Trump continues to lie about the 2020 election has been pervasive among voters in both parties. I think everybody's looking over their shoulder as they cast their ballots, be it now or on Election Day, to make sure things get counted and counted properly.
And Tara, meanwhile, NBC News is also reporting that the Harris campaign is feeling a little less bullish about victory in North Carolina. 4 people with knowledge tell NBC News that Hurricane Helene's destruction and the disinformation that followed could weigh against the Harris campaign. How much of an impact do you think this could have?
In an election as close as this one is, it could have an impact. I mean, last time around, COVID had an impact, and people were upset about some of the rule changes for voting, and that created some of the chaos that the Trump campaign took advantage of after the election last time. This time, we're dealing with a natural disaster that, Trump is out there spreading misinformation. FEMA workers are being threatened. It doesn't give me confidence that we're going to have a smooth election in North Carolina, especially when it comes down to a few percentage points. I mean, that was the closest state that Biden lost in 2020. I do think, though, that North Carolina is still in play for Kamala Harris, and that, what's happening there just is it highlights really just how important it is that every vote counts, whether it's North Carolina, whether it's Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and even Georgia. We also need to be careful with the disinformation campaigns there, given that Mike Whatley, who's now the head of the RNC, was part of the election denying efforts by the Trump campaign, and he runs the RNC now. So there needs to be hypervigilance around that.
So President Biden won Wisconsin by about 20,000 votes in 2020. Trump won the state by roughly the same amount in 2016. How's it looking this time?
Nobody knows who's going to win, but we know that it's going to be very, very close, because that's just the way that it goes in Wisconsin. It comes down to turnout, because it is very difficult to tell. I went to a polling summit with some of the top pollsters in Wisconsin and the country last week, and their consensus was, we don't know. We don't know what's going to happen. It's all within the margin of error. They're going to be really tight races, both for president and the U.S. Senate here.
Yeah, I mean, NBC News has new reporting that the Harris campaign is somewhat concerned about being able to win all 3 of the so-called blue wall states, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. The most recent Wall Street Journal poll of Wisconsin voters shows a tie, and you were just referencing to that, between Harris and Trump. How concerned are Wisconsin Democrats about the vice president's ability to win that state?
Well, it's kind of interesting in Wisconsin, because the background to the election this year is that this will be the first time that we have an election for state legislative seats under new maps. Wisconsin has been, according to one federal judge, the most gerrymandered state in the country, with Republicans controlling 2/3 of the state Senate, even though it's a 50-50 closely divided state. We now have new maps. They're much more competitive. There are Democrats running in districts around Wisconsin that they hadn't even tried to field candidates in before. There are 46 field offices for Democrats that are new around the state. So there's a kind of a sense that Democrats could really make some gains in Wisconsin down ballot. And the state party chair, Ben Wickler, thinks that could have kind of a reverse coattails effect, that it will drive voters to come out and vote for Democrats in places that had been so solidly Republican that they had been really just discouraged before.
And Ruth, I mean, what are the major ballot initiatives this year?
There's one major ballot initiative. Of course, there are always local referendums for school funding and municipal funding, but there's one constitutional amendment on the ballot that would bar non-citizen voting, which, of course, is already a federal crime. It's a felony, punishable by deportation and prison time. But the constitutional amendment that's on the ballot would make it impossible, basically, for localities to allow non-citizens to vote in local school board races and other local elections. That hasn't happened here, but it's sort of an effort to preempt that and really to keep immigration at the top of mind for voters.
And Ruth, let's talk a little bit about what you just briefly mentioned, the issue of the Senate race in that state. How's it looking?
So incumbent Senator Tammy Baldwin is running for her 3rd term. She was previously in Congress. And she is an interesting candidate because she often wins in very Republican districts in Wisconsin. She has worked really hard on dairy farm issues, which are a big deal in Wisconsin. She has been sort of at the forefront of the Affordable Care Act, actually wrote the provision that extends coverage for children on their parents' insurance until they're 26. A big fighter for women's health rights, has proposed a bill that would codify Roe v. Wade. That's a very big deal in Wisconsin because women lost abortion rights for more than a year here under an 1849 law after Roe was overturned. So it's a tight race, like every race this year. Her opponent, Eric Hovde, is a bank owner, and he is running sort of on the Trump message. He tries to connect her to the border, to undocumented immigrants, he's an anti-abortion candidate. They had a debate on Friday where it turned very personal. He was calling her a liar. And Baldwin was mostly sticking to the policy issues that she's long been, deeply in the weeds on, including the Farm Bill. And Hovde actually said during the debate that he doesn't know what's in the Farm Bill. So it was kind of an interesting moment. And I guess the question really is whether, as in previous years, Baldwin will be able to get out split ticket voters, people who might vote for Donald Trump, but have really voted for her, even in very Republican rural areas of the state, because she has been so deeply involved in helping farmers and, these policy issues that matter a lot specifically to her constituents in those areas.